the shepherd pauses in the valley and visits everywhere. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, forever young, forever old. My heart will sing your songs of glory. Jerusalem, 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 oh city with the heart of gold. My heart will sing your songs of glory. Jerusalem. Why must we be so brutal? Why must we terrify the world and bloody her knees? Why can't we bury our...
A couple of years ago when we went to Washington, a group from Fort Wayne and Washington, D.C., to the protest about the World Bank and the World Trade Organization. And when we were there and on the way home, we decided there's a whole lot of stuff we don't know. And there's probably still some stuff I don't know. And so we formed this study group, and we've been looking at the globalization issues and the World Bank issues. And this fall, when it looked like our president was going to try to conquer the world in the name of God, we said that we needed to look at the empire, the whole idea of empire. And so we've been having different people come to talk to us about different countries and about what occupation means and about what colonizing our own minds means. And so here we are, and today we have another group of folks that are going to be telling us some more things. Why don't we go around and say our names, and then Sox can introduce the group. I'm Joanne.
My name's Lance. I'm one of the delegates in the Israel-Palestine.
And I'm Gretchen. I'm another delegate member.
Sox.
Brian.
Joyce.
Marcy. Amy. Allison.
Dave.
Carol.
Jeff.
Okay, thank you. And if any of you are not on our mailing or email list, why I'll pass that around and you can sign up.
I will trip today. They came from Bloomington to visit and present to us, so we really appreciate on this beautiful day your efforts to come on up here. We are happy today to welcome our representatives from the Indiana delegation to Israel and Palestine. Last August went to visit, and they'll be presenting today. Gretchen Clearwater, Allison Strang, and Lance Thurner. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, welcome. Glad you're here.
So yes, my name is Lance Thurner, and this summer, Allison and Gretchen and I were part of a group of 9 people, mostly from Bloomington and also from Indianapolis, who are all very concerned with this issue. And we decided that what we really wanted to do was go to Israel and Palestine to see for ourselves what the real situation was on the ground there. We didn't really trust what was coming across in the media to us to be the whole story of the whole issue. So we went to Israel and Palestine. You can see here's most of our group. One member wasn't allowed through the airport into Israel, so he had to fly home. You can see myself, Gretchen, Allison, and the other 5 people. So after a long summer of preparation, the 8 of us, I guess, spent 3 weeks in Israel and Palestine investigating this conflict. And that's what now brings us here before you today. 2 quick points I want to bring up is that none of us in our group had any special relation to this conflict, any personal stake in it, except for one person, Jessica here, and her family's Jewish, and so she had that personal stake. And also our group was completely self-assembled. We had no political affiliation or any real ideas of what we were going into beforehand. It was very honestly meant to be a fact-finding mission. So since I've been back, many people come and ask me, what did I do over the summer? I tell them I spent 3 weeks in Israel and Palestine, in that part of the world, and usually the first thing they ask is, why the heck would you go there? Why would you go to this part of the world where most Americans, their response is that those people have always been killing each other, and they always will be killing each other, and the violence is really never going to stop. Why didn't the 9 of us just accept that little grain of American wisdom and step back and let the peoples kill each other, and maybe we could walk in that last moment before the oil all goes up in flames and take it home? Perhaps if this conflict was simply between 2 governments, the Israeli government and the Palestinian government, we'd do just that. But unfortunately, there's 9 million or 10 million other people stuck in this conflict, both Israelis and Palestinians, and it isn't just a boxing match between Ariel Sharon and Yasser Arafat. So first of all, we went on this trip out of a deep feeling of responsibility, being world citizens. As this new century is opening before us, it's becoming more and more evident, this world loyalty that each of us has. And although certainly Israel and Palestine isn't the most dangerous place in the world, it isn't the worst place to live, and more people are dying in Africa from AIDS and famine, and more people are being killed in Colombia and Iraq, it has a very specific and special place on the world stage. Its political, its physical, and its strategic position in the world really make it have the ability to be a precedent-setting example for the future. So we also went on this trip because we're U.S. citizens, and it's no secret that the United States is funding the occupation of Palestine. Right now, the Israeli economy is really not doing so hot. It's in shambles. They're on the brink of a recession, and this is mostly due to the overwhelming burden of occupation, which is incredibly expensive. And the only way that Israel really keeps afloat right now is from the large amounts of U.S. money going to it. Israel receives more U.S. aid money than any other nation in the world, even though it is a first world nation. And the large majority of this money is gun money. They're gift certificates for U.S. arms manufacturers. And this still doesn't include the $9 billion that we've promised Israel for the fight against terrorism, which is AKA to maintain the occupation. So there was a third reason why we have special responsibility, and that is that we are citizens of the West. It was the colonial legacy of Europe that really caused this problem in the Middle East. And it was the racism of almost every nation in the world that made necessary a Jewish state. Back after World War I, Europe decided it was their patriarchal responsibility to bring this part of the world into their empires. But after a few years, the Depression of the 30s was coming upon everyone, with a great burden on their shoulders, and they couldn't afford to maintain their occupation of the Middle East. So they quickly pulled out. France and Britain drew a couple really misguided lines on the map and waltzed out of there, leaving behind this quagmire and this horrible problem, which they certainly weren't about to fix themselves. It was at the same moment as the Depression was hitting that the western part of the world really stepped up their racism against the Jews, because they were the perfect scapegoat for what was happening, for the economic downfall. And so once World War II finally ended and the world was unraveling the Nazis' final solution, it became obvious the long history of persecution of the Jews, and it finally awoke Western leaders to realize that the Jews needed a safe place to live. And so finally, they established their own state, which is the Israel we see today. So from this little chronology, you can see that the origins of this conflict really are the colonialism and the racism of the Western powers. And that gives us, as American citizens, a bit of responsibility here again. So, although this conflict has a very, very long history, going back many millennia, this piece of land here, Israel and the West Bank, is less than half the size of Indiana. But it's not just the history of this little land that's important, it's the history of both these peoples, the Israelis and the Palestinians, through these ages and ages of racism and colonialism that add up to the current situation. And although this history is really important, we can't just reduce this conflict down to some kind of argument of who was there first, because we can't treat Israel and Palestine as if they were two children on the playground with a ball. The maxim of playground justice does not apply here, does not apply on the world stage. And what we really are concerned with is the history being made today and the needs of all 10 million people, both in Israel, in the West Bank, and in Gaza, for a secure and safe existence in the future. And that is exactly why we made this trip. And it is on behalf of those 10 million people that we came here today. It is on their behalf that we're presenting to you and hopefully inspire you to act to help bring this situation to an end. So now to begin explaining how this occupation works, what it is, and what it looks like, Gretchen will talk a little bit.
Well, if you think,
Hold on, Gretchen, I got to...
go ahead there. If we think that the occupation of the West Bank is a voluntary thing, that people are just giving up their lands willingly, you're living under a myth. Because in order to take over the West Bank, or in order for the Israelis to take control of it, they have to use violent mechanisms and other mechanisms that Allison will talk about. But one thing that really struck me was in visiting especially the larger cities, the amount of violence that has already happened there. And it looks like a war zone, and while we're not seeing any war happening there right now, what we saw happened as long as just a year ago. So it's actively happening, and it's very, very prevalent everywhere that you go. So I'm just going to show you some slides because they tell it all, really. You see the occupation of military. The presence of military is everywhere. Up on the left there, Allison, you have your little pointer. These guys up here in this military thing are all over the West Bank. This happens to be at a checkpoint. There are hundreds of checkpoints, hundreds of roadblocks, and they are everywhere. So that's part of a military that takes over people. This is concertina wire that is close to a town called Kalkilian. If you look at pictures of Iraq, you'll see the same concertina wire in the war zone in Iraq. This is next to a big fence. You see these are at roadblocks. It's intimidating, you can't get through, and it's meant to keep people out. You control population by having prisons. This is a brand new prison that's being built. It's an interrogation center. The office buildings are up on top and the prisoners are down below. So that's in Jerusalem. These towers here you see all over the West Bank. It's a heavily armed military tower. This is along the coast of the Red Sea and Jordan in the background. These are landmines. So we don't have anything like this in our borders between Canada and the United States. We don't have them between Mexico and the United States. So this tells me something more is going on if you have to have that kind of a protection between your borders. This is a typical scene. We saw these places like this all over the place. This is taken in Hebron. Someone was suspected of doing something and the military comes in and blows up a whole household, several households. It's very hard to photograph destruction because it's already destroyed, but it's really hard to see it when you see it. This here is a grenade hole. We stated this is the Ramses hostel, war-torn, bullet holes in the walls. Bullet holes in the walls at Tulkarm. That's Hebron, again, we just saw that. But these are taken in Nablus, another really hard-hit town. Tons and tons of these kind of buildings. This was a factory. Another building. Another building. And this boy was blinded by shrapnel just a couple of years ago, and so they now have schools for the blind. Another bathroom blown out. Tanks needed to get from this side to that side, so they just bulldozed down the homes to get there. It's astonishing to see these things. This here is Jenin. This is the refugee center or refugee camp in Jenin. Right in this area, 400 homes were demolished last year. This is called collective punishment. When you punish everybody for the crimes of a few. You know, when the suicide or the terrorists that blew up the building in Oklahoma, we didn't go to their homes and blow up their homes. It's happening there. This boy lost his arms. This is in Hebron. You can see the charred out places where bombs have been, you know, fighting's gone on. Charred out areas here. Roadblocks prohibiting traffic going in and out of certain sections of town. Bullet holes in Hebron. Bullet holes. These are what people live with. So you know, to take over the parts of Hebron, which I'll tell you about a little bit later, they did not do it peacefully. One of the ways in war, you have this person lives in this home, they own that land, they own the home, it's scheduled to be demolished. In wars, people are thrown off of their land. Well, this person's home just was destroyed recently. And they have a choice. They can either stay on their land in a shack like this or move up into the refugee camp. So it's literally pushing people off their land. This was taken in Jerusalem. And this is happening as we speak. This guy named Atta right here. This is his third home. The Israelis the government has torn down 2 other homes previous to this, and this part of it was blown down, and he's rebuilt it. He owns this land, and the land that is further down off the mountain is some of the most fertile land you've ever seen. Gorgeous, gorgeous grapevines, but they just are trying to persuade him to move off the land. And there he is with his daughter. And another thing is, you know, here's a town called Zeta, a roadblock right in front of it. And that sign up there says, "Welcome to Zeta." This is completely disrupting the flow of what's going on in the area. So those are just a few of the violent or the oh wait, I think I have some more here. We've heard about the fence or the wall going up. In order to build that fence, they had to, this was done a day before I left the area. This is a mall area. To build the fence, the business had to be killed in that area. So, there's Nablus. I've mentioned it before, where the refugee camp is. Very poor area. Here's a refugee camp. These are people in a time of war. You get shoved off from your land. You have to go someplace. They go here. Tanks have driven off through their roads, destroyed them. This is the home of a suicide bomber's family. 16 people lived in this home. We were in a town next door. We heard that it destroyed. They come in, they give you, it's about 1:30 or 2 in the morning. You hear these planes flying over, and then you hear that da-da-da-da-da like that. They're given 10 minutes to get out of their home, and then they just come in and destroy it. And this was after the terrorist had already been, or the bomber had already been arrested. So this is like double punishment. And this is the same home, and this is the neighbor's wall there. So you can see it impacts everybody. And these are the kids that have to live with that. And you wonder where the suicide bombers come from. If you live with that kind of thing, I think that's what's being produced. So that's all I have to say at this moment. Allison?
Gretchen's shown some images of destruction to us, and I'm going to kind of talk more about the roadblocks that we've seen, and use this as tools for controlling the area. And we hear a lot in the media about security purposes, and from what we have seen and what our experiences have been is that maybe not as much for security, but as much more as like control, to be able to control the land and been able to create the idea of a greater Israel, a greater state. Israel seems to have maintained this area with these tools, I said, and stopping any kind of movement from happening by imposing curfews and checkpoints and creating roads of which only Palestinians can travel on and only settlers are able to travel on, and roadblocks in order to make sure that you go through these checkpoints and stuff. And it would seem that maybe these exist for security reasons, that they would check at the checkpoints and make sure you don't have a weapon, and then you wouldn't be able to cross because you don't have a weapon, or make sure that these roadblocks were impenetrable. But actually, from our experiences when we were there, they look at your ID and discriminate and use that as like a discrimination against letting you in. And sometimes in the checkpoints they'll say, if you're a male from the age 18 to 40, you're not able to come through. So I mean, whether or not you are a terrorist, if you are just a Palestinian male from the age 18 to 30, you're not able to pass through. So that's a discrimination against people, and they check your passports and stuff. They let you through. Even in the roadblocks, I'll get to more. I'm just kind of giving an introduction, but in the roadblocks, they're put there. They're like rocks put there, and they're taken down and put back. Palestinians are like, we'll move them so they can go on their route and visit their family and friends. But then they're just put right back again. This is the first I'm going to cover. I'm going to cover curfew, and then checkpoints, roadblocks, the controlled roads, and the wall. And these restrictive measures, they destroy the people's society, able to interact as a socially. The economics, health. A lot of people can't get to hospitals when they need to seek some health care or an education. They're not able to educate their population. This is Hebron on the left, a picture of Hebron under curfew. And being under curfew means empty streets, markets are packed away, and schools are closed. Curfews are imposed when the Israeli military is invading the towns and the villages. And it can last up to 5 to 30, 54 days. And if you're caught out, you could be shot. If you're lucky, you're arrested, but you could be shot. And the Israeli military, they'll be let out maybe about once a week for a little bit of time, so they're able to go to the hospital, gather some supplies, but then they have to go right back under curfew, and they're not able to leave their home. And so this is the ultimate form of restriction, because they're not even allowed to leave their houses. And a lot of times the Palestinians, they'll get sick of living under such restriction and start to risk their lives in order to see their friends, in order to see their families, in order to do these things, in order to seek their freedom. And if they're, they could be shot, they'll run around, they'll go to the markets. The markets are always ready to open like that, like the whole Palestinian community still functions under these things, but it's very dangerous for them to live and to do this. They'll wait, until the Israeli Jubilees, and then sneak off and do what they need to do. So, this is checkpoint. Palestinians aren't allowed to drive their cars through the checkpoints. They have to walk by foot. And here's a group of people passing through. Right here is the settlers, their license plates. So the settlers have yellow license plates, and the Palestinians have green license plates. And only settlers are allowed to pass freely on the settler roads. The checkpoints, they act like a wall, opening and closing in order to let people through, and regulating when people can go through. And under times of high tension, political tension, they'll possibly be shut off, completely, and people, they can't go to work. They can't at all. We met a man. This is a soldier at the checkpoint. And the soldiers that are working at the checkpoints, they're about 18, 19 years old. Israel is a military state, and so from 18 to 23 they must serve in order to be an active part of the Israeli economy. And there are these 18, 19-year-old boys working these checkpoints and telling a 40-year-old Palestinian man that he's not allowed to come through. And see his, go to his place of employment, you know, see his family, all these different things. And this young man and I, we had a conversation. There are these, you can kind of see a little corner right here, there's like these big cement blocks. You know, we were talking about him being in the military, and he can't wait to get out of the military. He says the first thing he's going to do is leave the country. He's going to go away. And but then later on in our conversation, he talks a lot about how he loves his country. You know, he's got a lot of pride for his country. So you've got this kind of like the duality between like what they will what they're supposed to be doing and what they want to do, and it's very evident. And they say, like I said, they stand behind these big cement blocks. And they really think that all Palestinians are bad people. He's like, why do you want to go in? Why do you want to come in here? All they'll kill you. You know, why do you want to? And aren't you afraid? You know, look what I have to wear. Look what I have to wear to protect me. Like, you know, he touches his gun, and look what I have to carry. You know, he really thinks there's like all these people are horrible. And so. Sometimes at these checkpoints, a lot of times at the checkpoints, are just, it seems like they're there to harass and humiliate the Palestinians. This gentleman, he was sitting in the hot sun for about 4 hours while we were leaving. While we were there, he was there, and a man that was with us gave him a bottle of water. I offered him a bottle of water, and he said that he didn't want the bottle of water. Can I excuse myself? I think I need to use the bathroom really quick. Excuse me.
At the checkpoints, to way in the interior, see the Israeli flag flying. These are in areas, especially here in right by Nablus, that Israelis are not supposed to be, and so it's kind of an affront, I think, you know, and to see an Israeli flag flying high on your land, I think it's just kind of another smack in the face.
This is when we were on our way to Nablus. We had to go through kind of 2 checkpoints in order to get there. And the first checkpoint we got to by car, and the second checkpoint we had to go to by foot. And it's really chaotic. If we were driving on the wrong side of the road. As you can see, the one way is going this way, and then the other line of traffic's going that way, and then there's some people that are trying to like go around it and get in. Because we were American, our cab driver thought that we would have a better chance of getting in. So no, we'll drive a left hand road. We'll get in just fine. We'll get in just fine. And I'm sorry, I'm going through I feel like I'm going to tell you these stories, but I don't know with time. But so we met this man named Nishat, and when we get to the checkpoints, we spent a couple hours. The soldier that I just showed you here, like we stood there for a couple hours, like trying to get in. We ended up not being able to get in, and this man that we had met, Nishat, on our way there, he gave us his phone number, and so we called him, and we went and we stayed with him. And then after we stayed with him, we found out that just like he got through that first checkpoint when he was with us in the taxi cab, but to get into his town, they held him there for an hour. They just held him there. They just wouldn't let him go for an hour, so they finally let him in. And then where we passed, there was a roadblock there, and it's like this little town, and they just put like roadblock. This is Nishat, and this is his son, and this is after we passed through. It was when we separated. Kind of, we didn't exchange any goodbyes, you know, thank you for, you know, it was nice to meet you, all these different things, because the soldier immediately walked up to him and targeted him and to have discourse with him of some sort, because we were walking away at this point. We snapped a picture. And this is a symbol of a roadblock that I'll put down. They just simply dump gravel on a road in order to kind of like you can't pass, but you can. So it doesn't necessarily mean you think it's going to block a terrorist from like getting through. I mean, you can walk right over it, you can move the rocks, you can do all these different things. So it's like making it a little bit more difficult for people to function, to have any kind of viable life at all. It's just not simple. Another roadblock, not all rocks, they've set fences up. This is in Hebron. We stayed with the Christian Peace team up here. Another roadblock, big slabs of concrete, had them moved. In front of this town, what was this town?
Zeta.
Zeta. In front of Zeta, welcome to Zeta, sign, dumped cars and car parts and pieces in front of it. Now, this is a road. This is a settler road that only settlers are allowed to travel on. Palestinians aren't allowed to travel on these roads.
Excuse me, did you say only which people are allowed?
Settlers. And I had said that Israelis own license plates with the yellow license, cars with yellow license plates, and Palestinians with the green. And this is an example of Palestinian roads, which go through farmland, really rocky roadblocks would dump down in front of the roads, and you can't go any further. They are right here. This is like a meandering checkpoint where it functions kind of as a checkpoint where the Israeli military will just drive around and they sit where a Palestinian road is in order to like not let them pass. And they'll leave, and then the Palestinians go on their way, but it just makes it like a lot more difficult to like move around and have relations with one another and have like harmony in society. This is an example of a settler road, Greenwood, and Palestinians to get from Bethlehem to Hudable would have to take the red one in order to get it all the way around. And it would usually take 30 minutes. Now the Palestinian road takes about 3 hours for them to get from where they need to be. And with all the settled roads, with which way they're set up, but they're around settlements in Gretchen. I'll talk more about settlements later, but as you can kind of see, like this is the West Bank, and it's completely divided out by these roads that the Palestinians aren't allowed to travel on. It's kind of like, I mean, if there would be such thing as a Palestinian state, it's like a Swiss cheese state. It's like holes like throughout the whole thing, and so it's not a very strong plan for the Palestinians. And this is Iman, and we stayed with her family, and she travels on roads like this to get to school. And she said to us that one time she sat on a road like this for 3 hours. She was on her way, and they just stopped her and made her sit for 3 hours. Sometimes they confiscate cell phones, take away passports, and take away their identification, and just harass them.
When you say they, what
This
are you
is
referring to?
Israel military. This is a picture of the wall, and it reaches a highest height of 26 feet and a length of 220 kilometers, and that is 10 feet higher than the Berlin Wall and almost over twice as long. And this wall will entrap 12,000 people, affect 200,000 people. And this wall confiscates 3,000 olive and fruit farms, 80% of all water aquifers, leaving 250 villages without water, 15 kilometers of agricultural roads, 288.3 kilometers of land, and which is the most fertile part of the West Bank, period. And here's the picture. Now, a lot of people call the wall, the fence, a lot of different things because it's a lot of different things. It's not one constant thing throughout, around the whole perimeters of inside of the Green Line. But it's like in some parts it's actually like a whole zone, a whole kind of like barrier zone. On this side you have the razor wire, a trench that's dug out, a security road that's only traveled by the military, a fence, another security road, another trench, and then surrounded kind of like sandwiched in by the razor wire. And here's a picture of it, that drawing was. There's the razor wire, the trench, the road, fence, another road, another road. And here's a picture of the wall that's already been constructed. And as you can see, it's on the inside of the borders of the West Bank, the Green Line. And it's not like a road that, a wall that just goes straight around. It snakes around aquifers and the most fertile land, all the way around here. And in some places, it completely bottles off a town, a village. And then that one entranceway that would be open like in the bottlehead would be surveillance by a checkpoint, so they can completely control what goes in, what goes out, who goes in, who goes out, what times, and things like that. And this is a closer picture of what I was talking about, of like the bottling off the village. This is the wall right here. It goes all the way around by Jayus. Kakilia comes in around the settlement. The blue is the settlements all the way around. So it's like, and like I said before, the biggest casualties of this restriction of movement is the health and education system, because many people cannot get to hospitals and they'll die if they need emergency procedures. A lot of people can't feed themselves anymore. 1 in 5 children under the age of 5 suffer from malnutrition in Palestine, and Palestinians also face dire economic and social situations. Then people, in the case of a curfew, or in case of needing to travel at all, nobody knows when they'll be able to leave their houses. Nobody knows how long it would take them to get to work, how long it would take them to do anything. So they don't make plans. They don't buy new stock or invest in a certain business because they don't really know what kind of future they have. And so the small business and the entrepreneurs they're disappearing completely, and they're becoming more dependent on money coming in from family members and friends from abroad and from the neighboring Arab countries. And a lot of what is getting imported and exported as far as foods and goods is from Israel. So in a sense, they're supporting the Israel economy and not even functioning within a Palestinian economy at all. So seemingly these restrictions and movement such are placed, like the wall and roadblocking and the curfews and things, are because of security reasons, but it doesn't. It doesn't.
Well, it makes sense.
Well, it doesn't make sense from what we've seen. It doesn't, it doesn't stop, and it hasn't been stopping anything. I think they're still continuing. And from the groups that we met with, it would seem that the communication between these two groups, instead of making a division between these two groups, is what's going to help get to the cause, or help the solution of the destruction and the terrorism and things that are happening. And creating these barriers only further creates separation between the two people and increases fear. So. Gretchen's going to talk more about
the curfews and the roads and the highway system. So you'd have to ask why do this? It's further down.
Yeah.
And why occupy this land? And I think part of the reason is simply because they want to take the land and they want to put their citizens onto it. That's the only thing I can think of also. And so the question is, she mentioned settlers a lot. There are 400,000 settlers in the West Bank. 200,000 of those live in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not actually the recognized capital of Israel, excepting by Israel. The UN does not recognize it as the capital. So the approximately 200,000 that live in Jerusalem are there illegally, according to the UN. Another 200,000 of them live out on the West Bank, and many of those came in right after the Oslo Accord. They come from all over the world. There are different statuses. Some of them are like refugees from Russia, fleeing the system in Russia, and it's a very legitimate reason for leaving Russia, but it's not necessarily legitimate for coming into the West Bank. Then there's also economic refugees from the city they're very, very poor, and the government gives them these incredibly low interest rates so they can move on to the West Bank and live very cheaply, and it also it helps the government occupy the West Bank. There's another group of people that come into the West Bank, and they are the religious, ultra-religious people who believe that God gave them that land, it belongs to them, and they have the God-given right to that. There are not as many of those as there are of the economic and the other political refugees. Our own land out in the West Bank, but don't actually live on it.
Just wait a second.
So it's kind of like ghost settling. It's like I've got this piece of property, I don't farm it, I don't do anything to it, but I have an apartment in Jerusalem. Here's a prison that I mentioned before. I just connect prisons and police to settlements. This is a settlement called Har Homa. I think 10,000 people live in this settlement. Bethlehem is over here, Jerusalem over here. It kind of looks like a fortress to me. These are all illegal residents. Around Jerusalem it's very, very arid, as you can see. And so you wonder what on earth this green spot is, and this is Maladumim. It is one of the largest settlements in the West Bank. 27,000 people live there. These people are mostly economic people. They've come here for economic reasons, and if someone says, my God, we've got this great place out, a swimming pool, sports complex, who wouldn't come for, with low interest to come into a nice place like this? The highway systems that Allison mentioned keep them perfectly safe because Palestinians can't drive on the highway to the settlement. And what's very particular about this particular settlement is it sits right smack in the middle. There's a map behind you, Allison, and which makes the conflict very, very complex, is because Maladumim, so you have the northern part of the West Bank and the southern part of the West Bank, and Maladumim sits right here. So if you say, let's let Israel keep some settlements and they keep Maladumim, then you've got the severing of the West Bank. So these settlements are really, really key places. This is a home of a future settlement. They've claimed it. These are settlements at night. Any town that you go to in the West Bank, you just turn around and you will see the homes of where the settlers live. This is in Nablus. Allison showed this. This is the result of curfew. This is in order to settle, you have to bring your settlers in. You have to make it safe for them. Daylight should look like the slide on the right, but it doesn't. People live behind those green doors. People are hungry behind those closed doors. Their businesses are lost. Settlers literally live on top of the Palestinians. If you go a little bit down further into the network there, you'll see netting, and here's where the Palestinians live, and the settlers literally live on the second floor above them. And they throw rocks down on them, and the peacemaker team that we were with said they sometimes throw boiling water down on them. And the population that happens to live in Hebron come from New York City. This is a school that's being built for them, and these are the religious settlers claiming that this is their land. They claim 480 or so of them, but not all of them live there. Again, it's kind of like ghost settlement. One of our delegation members talked with a young woman from New York. I think she was 19, just married to an Israeli. And he asked her if she was Jewish, and she said no, she's converting to Judaism. But she's just come out there to live on the land because, you know, it's a pretty place to live. To protect the settlers, you've got the military, so they're pretty free to live. And around Hebron, you've got the military in the center of the town, military here, military all around. So it's like all the way around Hebron to protect the settlers, and then on the inside to protect it. And Allison mentioned that they get hungry and that they have a problem with economy. This is evidence of it. This is a soup kitchen. Every day at around noon, all these kids come running out of those hidden doors, those blocked doors, to come and get soup. They're not in prison. It's an Islamic society, and boys and girls are separated. So, but this was an example. Hebron, I think, was the worst case. After years and years and years of this happening, this is Hebron is the grand finale of it, and this is the aim of the rest of the West Bank, and that's my portion.
Oh, back to another presentation. There we are. So, we don't need that part yet. Oops, wrong direction. There. So to try to summarize everything that Allison and Gretchen were here to present, the occupation is a complex matrix of different mechanisms which all come together to control the Palestinian population. And this is done by controlling transportation, and by fragmenting the West Bank into pieces, as Gretchen was talking about with Ali Adamin, and the roads, as as Allison was talking about, and also by surrounding the West Bank. So, an easy way to try to look at this, to understand how it really comes together, is to think of a prison. To think of the blueprint or the layout of a prison. So first of all, the prisoners are surrounded by a lethal, intimidating prison walls, capped with barbed wire or razor wire, whatever they choose to use at this place, with guard towers and guns. And then if we look at the blueprint of the prison, the actual prison structure, the walls, the bars, the guards, they take up very little space, and in fact the guards are incredibly outnumbered by inmates. Perhaps only a handful of guards for every 100 inmates. Well, this is exactly the same situation that's happening in the West Bank. The Palestinians outnumber the guards by incredible numbers. There's thousands of Palestinian civilians for every couple of Israeli military officers. The roads, the settlements, and the checkpoints and the roadblocks all take up very little space. But still, these things all come together to control the movement of people, the communication of people, and to fragment the people apart so that they cannot unite and become strong. And so that is how Israel rules the West Bank. Perhaps the only difference between the prison and the West Bank is that in Palestine, the prison's being built right on top of their homes. The prison is the home for the Palestinians. And so they really don't have a will to run away. They're not trying to escape. And if the occupation works like a prison, there's also the explanation of why, which is what Gretchen was explaining with the settlements. This occupation is not nation building. It's not regime change, and it's nothing like the occupations post World War II to reconstruct the messes that were created. And this also isn't an occupation to create a banana republic like our own nation's occupations in the 80s and continuing today. This is about land. This occupation is not about religion or race, it's about land. And therefore, behind the scenes of the violence, the occupation is building settlements and also declaring necessary military zones and building this wall to take land and to strategically manipulate laws and demolish houses and use intimidations to force people to leave. So that's the reason why I would like to go a little bit more into the wall, which is what Allison was talking about earlier. earlier in the presentation when Allison talked about it, she was talking about really how it's been constructed and what it does, and I want to revisit it about its symbolic value. The building of the wall itself shows the absolute dominion of Israel over the Palestinians. It shows to the world that Israel has the power to just walk in and build this blatantly illegal wall on Palestinian territory. And we can see this is a comic that Gretchen found in the Christian Science Monitor, and this really well describes what's happening. Israel is simply building it right through Palestine. And around their nice little home of Palestine is beginning divided right in half. This is an important lesson because in this conflict, it isn't two equal sides battling it out. There is one incredibly stronger side, and that's Israel. So the other symbolic value of the wall is the division between the two peoples, the Israelis and the Palestinians. Be it the cause or the effect of the wall, the occupation maintains these two peoples separate and attempts to encourage understanding and to bridge differences and appreciate each other. The occupation separates them worse through the wall, through all these mechanisms that hinder transportation and communication. For some reason, the powers that be don't wish that these two sides communicate because maybe that's because that would be the end of war. I mean, it's important to remember that in order for a state to make war, a state must first make an enemy. And that's exactly what's happening with building this wall and with these restrictions to communication. So perhaps these powers that be, Israel and Palestine, their leaders, Ariel Sharon, Yasser Arafat, whoever we wish to put in their place, perhaps they are afraid that their populations could end the war without them, that through this communication, through understanding, which is how this war could end, the populations could go beyond what the politicians can do. And so the important point here is that this occupation really maintains this lack of understanding, and this lack of understanding maintains the conflict. So before coming here today, I looked up the definition of occupation, of war in the Webster's dictionary, because really occupation is war, at least that's what we're trying to define here today. So my Webster's dictionary says, a war is a contest between nations or states carried on by force, whether for defense, for avenging insults and redressing wrongs, for the extension of commerce, for the acquisition of territory, for obtaining and establishing the superiority and dominion of one over the other. So these last two motives is exactly Israel's intention in the occupation, the acquisition of territory and the establishing of superiority and dominion. And how does a warring nation do this? Establish dominion and acquire territory? Through the occupation. So the occupation really is war. I'm certain now, to start to wrap things up, that in this presentation that we've really created more questions than we've answered, or at least an even amount. Perhaps the first question that usually comes up is the chicken and the egg question of which came first, the violence against Palestinians or the violence against Israelis. Who threw the first punch? By whose sword did this violence start? But then maybe the better response to this question is, what does it matter? Because as I tried to explain in the introduction of this talk, that what we're really concerned with is the needs of these two peoples today. And these childhood games of who was there first and who threw the first punch don't really matter. So maybe we should instead proceed to another question, such as, how does this occupation feed the cycle of violence? Or perhaps worded in another way, what role does this occupation have in furthering the violence against Israel? It's an important question that we don't really attempt to answer for you, but one that must be thought about. And also we need to think about, in order to finish this conflict, in order to bring it to its end, to resolve it, we need to figure out who's going to make the first move, and maybe more importantly, who has the power to make the first move. And that is yet another question that we don't attempt to answer, but that needs some more exploration. So, as citizens of the world, and as part of the Western world, and as citizens of the United States, we have a great responsibility, all of us, to try to do what we can to help out this situation. And so then the final question is, what can we do to help out? And our suggestions is that we educate each other, that we speak up whenever we can to our friends, our family, our relatives, that we speak up to our politicians, that we encourage the United States to be friends of both nations, the Palestinians and the Israelis, and also to make the money that we give Israeli contingent on ending the occupation of the West Bank. And so that's where we're going to end this presentation, and we'd like to open this up to questions. We have a long time that we'll be here to answer questions, and we purposely wanted to create an atmosphere for that discourse.
Will you be showing more slides?
We could.
I'm just asking just in terms of...
Hamas and Islamic Jihad has said they're going to destroy Israel.
Yeah.
What would be your recommendations for protecting the safety and preventing that from happening?
Well, do you want to take this or do you want me to?
You can both do it.
All right. Well, I think that, first of all, Hamas and Islamic Jihad are very small minorities in Palestine. If you look at just the number of Palestinians who really insist on gaining back the entirety of Palestine, it's a minority. It's mostly limited to people who are refugees of the 1948 war and their descendants. So, and then if we take it another level, the people who are willing to fight for this and to kill for this right of return, that's a minority of this minority. And then finally, the people who are willing to become suicide bombers and attack Israel are a minority to the third degree. They're a minority of a minority of a minority. So it's a very small population. And still, I mean, they are a threat. They certainly are, and a legitimate threat that needs to be handled. And especially Hamas seems to have some amount of popular support. Now, it's easily argued that this support comes from the fact that Hamas isn't only a terrorist group. It is an alternative government to the Palestinian Authority. They build roads, they build schools, they build orphanages, they do all this other stuff. The terrorism and the armed conflict is only one campaign of this organization. And it's not necessarily that their support comes from the fact that they're fighting this war. It comes from the fact that they're building schools for the children, that they're building the roads, and the Palestinian Authority is completely absent in most of these cities outside of Ramallah and Jerusalem. So my prescription to ending the violence is that if the occupation would end, and if finally a real actual government could be built in Palestine, one that had some strength and had the credit of expelling the Israelis, and one that the people could rally behind, they would. Statistics show that the great majority of Palestinians are happy with a homeland within the West Bank, and only within the West Bank, as long as it was a sovereign nation and had its own rights and was completely separate of Israel and the Empire of the United States. So, if this was the case, this minority of a minority of a minority, I believe, could be finally ostracized and persecuted for being the criminals that they are. Because right now the institutes with which the Palestinian Authority is trying to pursue these people are completely destroyed. The police stations are crumbled. The records have all been stolen or burned. They have no structure with which that they could fight this terrorism within Palestine.
Who does?
The Palestinian Authority.
You believe that?
We didn't, I'll just add something. One thing was the conspicuous absence of any police force. The infrastructure of Palestine is completely demolished. It just doesn't exist. And I'll further add that my take on the Hamas situation is that I think that it is a small element of the population, just like there's a radical element in the Israeli population. But what the voice that the United States needs to listen to are the in-between voices. The voices saying, we want peace, we want two states, and not listen to the two extremes, because the two extremes are what's causing the trouble. And if we can just recognize that both sides that have those extremes and work with this group here, I think we could go a long, long way to bringing peace.
Well, I'll grant you that Hamas and the Al-Aqsa Brigade and some of these others are a small portion of the Palestinian peoples. Palestinian people are basically good people, just as the Israelis are basically good people. In your talk, I kept hearing words that, just kind of seem strange coming from people who speak about peace, because you always seem to want to paint the Israelis as being militaristic, and you want to use military officers instead of soldiers, and I think you spoke about 18 and 19-year-olds and that Israel's a militaristic state. Yes, they do have mandatory service because they've had to since the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. There were supposed to be two distinct states. The partition called for two states, the 1947 partition. Israel declared, when the United Nations granted them nationhood in 1948, they were immediately attacked by the Arab nations. Immediately attacked, and at the end of 1949, when the armistice came about, the area that's now the West Bank, which was supposed to be the Arab state, the Arab partner state in the region, was occupied, which I didn't hear you mention that, was occupied by Jordan from 1949 until 1967, and that never gets talked about. It also never gets talked about how the Palestinians who fled, as they were told to flee by the Grand Mufti in 1948, have never been absorbed into the countries that they live in. They're not allowed citizenship. King Hussein of Jordan chased him out in '73. He chased Yasser Arafat out for attempting to overthrow him. Arafat is a terrorist. And a couple years ago, when Ehud Barak, who was the predecessor to Sharon, they had 98% of what the Palestinians had asked for in the peace agreement. And Arafat turned his back and walked away. And then the West Bank erupted in violence. And you didn't mention any of that either.
Perhaps to give you a little context of what I know. I don't really know much about the history of the early.
But you should. But you need to in order to talk, in order to come in and speak from where you're speaking to people. I have no idea the background of the rest of the group here. But in order for you to come in and speak, and to speak with authority from your trip, you need to understand the context of the history of this region.
About the Barak offer, this map really shows it, because it was a pretty generous offer. If you say we're going to give you 7%, 98%. Well, that's fine, but look at the piece they're keeping. It's the 3% of the land that you get to keep.
Which was going to be worked out. This was going to be worked out on a side letter basis, just like any labor negotiation.
It would have been, this is my opinion, it would have been much more generous to say, okay, we'll keep this 3%, or this 3%, or this, but not this. Because this, in essence, divides the country in half.
This is actually the map of the Barak plan right here. And so these orange parts were the Palestinian sovereign areas of the Barak plan, and this tan part was at first going to be declared military zone to be eventually handed over to the Palestinians with some kind of plan that was never really created at the time. And then the settlements, these here show the settlements that Israel was going to keep in order with this plan. But so, in my opinion, it certainly was the best thing that Palestinians were ever going to be offered, and they certainly will never be able to get back this offer. But that doesn't really mean that it was an acceptable offer. With the three really big contingent issues in this conflict are sovereignty, the right of return, and Jerusalem, the problem of Jerusalem. And we can see on this map that, well, of course, the right of return was to be ended with this agreement. That was part of the agreement, was that no longer would Palestinians demand the right of return. And then if we look at the other two, the Jerusalem, we can see right here, in case anyone doesn't know, let me get over here real quick. Jerusalem's split in half. Half of it, this side of it, is under Israeli authority, and this side, the eastern half, is under Palestinian authority, at least for now. But with the Barak plan, Israel was going to take all of Jerusalem.
No, they were going to give East Jerusalem was going to be made up of the Palestinian authorities.
They were given a little neighborhood over here.
No,
It's
it was
called.
more than just a neighborhood.
But see, then you come into like
The conflict
of
opinions or
like
knowledge.
just where you find like what books are you reading and like where's the information coming from? I mean, like when I was speaking, I was speaking from like trying, like I know that I don't, there's a lot that I don't know about the history. There's so much about the history that, I mean, I've looked into, like, read a little bit. I just don't really ever really know where to begin. But like from what I was speaking from is like things that I saw with my eyes.
Buy yourself this book.
Yeah.
Buy yourself The Idiot's Guide to the Middle East. I recommend that to everybody, regardless of whose side you may want to land on. But this book and The Idiot's Guide to the Middle East are two exceptionally good books that very clearly define and explain the situation and put it into context. Well, when you were over there, I didn't notice that you mentioned, by all means, please. Did you go up to Wahat al-Salam, the Oasis of Peace?
Yes,
Did you go and talk with those folks?
Neve Shalom?
Yeah, Neve Shalom, but you didn't mention that.
Oh, we can't fit
Well,
everything on
but
I found your presentation offensively distorted and biased. And that makes it hard for me to understand and believe anything you said, because it was so incredibly biased.
Do you think it was any more biased than the news that we get in the U.S. media?
But that's different. They're
Well,
not
it's a fair question.
news. They're not.
I'm asking.
I happen to read the
Okay.
Jerusalem Post, I happen to read on the internet, I happen to read some other publications, and Palestinian publications.
And the question is, what is the truth?
I even find stuff like this.
What is the truth? I mean,
Can I wait before we go any further? I think it's very important that we establish some rules, that one person talks at a time and you raise your hand and we not have just two people dominating the conversation.
Good idea.
So, go ahead.
She had indicated.
I think I missed a little bit of the discussion because I was out for a couple of minutes. But first of all, I would like to say, I think the people from Bloomington and Indianapolis who went deserve a lot of credit for going to a part of the world that is very dangerous. And I think you presented information that maybe some people think is biased. But whatever it is, you presented information that we don't get very often when we read the daily press, let's say, or the mainstream press. Perhaps in the Village Voice you get some other points of view. So I think that's very nice that you did that. Plus the fact that it takes courage to go in a part of the world that is very dangerous, and that many of us, especially if you're old or not so healthy, you won't go to now. And so I want to thank you for that. Thank you for a very good presentation. I do have a little bit of a question here. There are Israeli soldiers who refuse to serve in the occupied territories. And I think the leader of that group is in prison, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know about the others, but I think that it's important to remember, or at least to bring out, that there are Israeli soldiers who are very bothered, who do not want to serve in the occupied territories because they don't want to oppress Palestinian people. The other thing that I thought I would like to mention is there is a group in Israel. I'm not sure, I don't know Hebrew, but it's written in Hebrew, and I'll just pronounce it as best I can. It's called Brit Tzedek Ve'Shalom, which means it's a Jewish Alliance for Justice and Peace. They're supposed to be a pretty good group. I know that Adrienne Rich, who's a Jewish lesbian living in California, is part of the board of that organization. And that organization is also listed in a journal that is called subscribe to that. Resist. It's called Resist. I don't know if you're familiar with that group, but they're in Massachusetts, and they bring out all kinds of NGO organizations. And I wonder if you have had any chance to talk to any of those people.
Yes, we have. Tomorrow evening, as a matter of fact, the president of the Greek Civic Organization is speaking in Bloomington. And so one of them works in my department, and so I attended a talk led by one of them at a synagogue in Bloomington. So it's a very active group, and they're a very wonderful and courageous group. And the other group that you mentioned, the Refuseniks, that's what they're called, the Courage to Refuse. We met with one of them when we were in Jerusalem. And they do go to prison, and it's a large, increasing number of soldiers that are saying, we love our country, we love the defense of our country, but we absolutely refuse to go into the West Bank. And so it is a very, very powerful organization.
You've been in contact with
Yes, we met with one of them.
Two groups.
Two groups. One, an older version, there was the older gentleman that we met with. Yesh Kabul was one. He refused to go to Lebanon when it was happening. And so now you have the younger generation coming in. And then there's another group of people that are just saying, we're not going to go into the military at all.
The conflict is over what's called the Geneva Accord. It's a group of leftist politicians in Israel who have gotten together with leftist politicians from Palestine and are kind of signing their own peace accord, regardless of what the government's saying, and trying to bring it in through the United Nations and through different international organizations, establish this peace accord and then impose it on their own governments to gain its popularity and impose it on its own governments. And it's a great display of exactly what you're talking about, that there's many, many people who are really seeking justice here, but the governments aren't allowing them to do that, and they have to work around them.
Frank, your hand was up.
Yeah, I just was going to say that this argument of who's right and who's wrong just can go on forever. And how do we get beyond who's right and who's wrong?
You know, I think, you know, the Israeli government disengaged several times over the last few years. They declared a truce. They declared a ceasefire, only to have it broken by suicide bombers. Now, regardless of who you want to say that the suicide bombers represent, a portion of them are controlled by Yasser Arafat. It's a known fact. The guy is a terrorist. That's his job. That's what he does for a living. All right. Every time these pieces are blown apart by terrorists, there of course is going to be a reaction from the people that have been targeted. And you know, we're not talking about suicide bombers attacking military targets. We're talking about suicide bombers who stick a bus and get on a bus filled with school kids and people and civilians who get blown up. You know, I just want to show you, you were very kind to show a number of faces. I just want to show you all these faces. And these are the faces of civilians in Israel who've been blown up by suicide bombers. A couple weeks ago, a doctor from Cleveland who made Aliyah had just come back after coming to the United States to do seminars on the treatment of people that have been wounded and hurt by these kind of bombs, because these type of explosions do incredible damage, concussion, internal stuff, all this kind of stuff. He flew back. He was meeting his daughter on the night before her wedding when a suicide bomber walked into the cafe and blew themselves up. They're killing him, killing his daughter. I mean, just on and on and on and on and on. And these people didn't do anything.
Yes.
I see just from, I think what I think these people are trying to say, and I don't know if I'm right or not, is that in the United States, like Timothy McVeigh, for instance, we did not go and, I mean, I just saw something on Dateline the other night where that Terry Nichols' brother's home was standing, and Terry Nichols was in with Timothy McVeigh on the bombing of the building in Oklahoma. And that was horrible, tragic. I look at Timothy McVeigh as a kind of a type of person that is a terrorist as well. But I think and I may be wrong, I don't know, but I think what young people and other people that having been there are so struck by is that it seems to be, and as you said, how do you keep the stone throwing or the name calling from continuing? That's the proverbial question. And how do you stop that violence? How do you stop it from both points of view? What is the middle ground? Where is that point? And I don't know. I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer, but I feel like that's what you are reporting, is that there are two sides to this, not just one. And right or wrong, I'm not in this room to go back and forth with anybody about what's right or wrong. It's very good to have the information. The more information you have, the more you can process it and hopefully come to a point.
Chris, you can take it.
You have something?
I said it started at the top brass and down. We didn't want more. I didn't want to go to the service. I had to. But the government said I had to go. Well, who were they to tell us, we've got to get up and vote, we've got to change the government and start down. There's no way I wanted to go to service, but I had to go. And I went. I didn't say it was right.
Right.
And when I got over there was a lot of people we met that didn't want to fight. But
Sure.
Our government sent us. So I think get rid of Arafat, or I don't know how you're going to do it, but top brass go down. I think that's the way you're going to get solved.
I'd like to kind of address the issue of suicide bombers and the violence against Israel. And in no means do we mean to justify it, to explain it, to say it has its purpose or anything like that. It is terrorism, there's no doubt about it. They're killing many, many innocent people. Maybe worse than that is they're bringing down terror amongst the Israeli population, making them live in this, walk down the street in fear, ride the bus in fear. Everything is in fear. We felt that simply walking down the streets of Jerusalem, Tiberias, and Tel Aviv, and Jaffa, a couple other cities. It's certainly there. The point we're trying to make is that the occupation of the West Bank isn't helping stop that violence. No matter how many as Allison was describing at the checkpoints, no one's cars are checked for bombs. No suitcases are checked for bombs. Any Palestinian can walk over a pile of rocks, just like we did, as you saw in these photographs. And this latest bombing, this last week in Haifa, I believe 20 people were killed at a diner, including many Arabs. It's been found that that bomber passed through a section of the wall that Israel's building, passed through an agricultural gate to get to his destination, to blow himself up. So the point we're trying to make is these mechanisms of occupation are not stopping the bombers at all.
And the point that I would add, I mean, I went over for strictly humanitarian reasons. I love both sides. I met great people on both sides. Both peoples, I noticed, have the same similar histories. We went to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, and you see the pictures of the signs that say, never forget. You know, and you see these horrendous things that happened in Germany. And then you go over to the West Bank and you see signs that say, never forget. So now both sides have histories, both sides feel injured. It's just time, and in my lifetime, all I have lived with is this crisis. And I want to see an end to it. I want it to stop, because both peoples are so hurt. You know, in Israel, we went to go have dinner, and our purses were searched. And, you know, I just cannot imagine having to live like that. And Palestinians, you know, you hold up a picture of you know, people innocently killed for nothing. And then you can hold up a same picture for the Palestinians. You can hold up this, and that's what struck me. It's kids, it's families, it's mothers, it's daughters, it's husbands and grandfathers that are being killed on both sides. And my humanity says, I don't want to see any of them die. Not a one. Not a one. And we can stop it. Occupying peoples isn't helping. And that's where I come from.
Well,
And
You know, I have to, and I respectfully differ with you in terms of, I really can't stand, it really disturbs me when people keep talking about the occupation. But I think, to be fair, I think you need to talk about these people in your presentation. And as Carol said, y'all did not give a roundabout analysis of the situation. If you want to really be fair to both sides, if you really want to be fair about the right of return, then we need to talk about the 640,000 Jews of Arab lands who were kicked out in 1948 when there was a country. And we need to talk about how the Grand Mufti told the people to leave, which oftentimes doesn't come out in many of the presentations that I've attended. It's just not a fact that's stated, and it needs to be stated. If you're going to talk about one thing, you need to talk about the other side of it too, because there is linkage there. There is linkage there. You have a peace plan. You have, and when you talk about Arafat, Yasser Arafat, like all of us, is going to die, and he's probably going to die within the next 2 years. Several of my friends are international experts on this, very fair-handed people. Arafat's going to die, and in that vacuum of his death, there's going to be a struggle for leadership for a few years. And when that happens, a lot of the moderates, the people, there are ongoing discussions right now that are going on between Palestinian technocrats and Israeli technocrats at a sub-cabinet level. And these go on all the time. Issues about water. And again, it's real incendiary when I go to programs and they show the Israeli swimming pool. That's just one of my hot buttons, okay? There are accusations that Israel is taking water away from the Palestinians. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, is under orders not to do anything to the aquifers, not to do anything to the electrical grid, and not to target the sanitation facilities, because those are Israeli infrastructure that they've put in place for them.
Yeah. I have to, we were in a town called Jayus, and this was the part that made me cry the worst. We were up on top of a hill looking down on the valley, and you can see, I'll show you an example. You talk about aquifers. Let's say this is Jayus, and this is a community here, and there is the Israeli-Palestinian border. The wall, the fence that we saw that was pictured in here, literally goes like this, like this, like this, like this, like this, snagging across.
I know that.
The border is here, and all the water that feeds to the city of Jayus is on that side of the fence. Jayus now exports all of its water. It imports its water because its water is on this side of the fence. These are Palestinians here. These are Palestinian land, Palestinian water, and you cannot tell me the water is being safeguarded because these guys now import it. So, yes?
I just want to kind of see if I can distill something. So there's been this violent conflict going on for many, many years. You guys your experience was that occupying the West Bank is not actually going to resolve or lessen violence. And you just said that that you disagreed with the wall, that you didn't think that the wall was actually going to lessen violence either. And I guess my thinking is that lessening violence is actually the most, it seems like the most important thing right now because the situation is so volatile. So I guess I'm wondering, what other ideas are there? Because obviously Israel wouldn't be occupying the West Bank without really feeling that that's really the way to lessen violence. I mean, that's my assumption. And I guess, the Palestinians seem like it's just in such a disarray for lots of different reasons. and excuse me for using the word occupying. I heard you say earlier that word doesn't, it kind of takes you to a different place. So I mean, I'm using it, and I'm without a lack of,
Well, you know how Israel came to be in the West Bank. You know how that happened.
Well, let me just say, okay, you had said that was set aside to be an Arab state.
That was to be an
Jordan
Arab state.
came in and occupied,
Right.
and then in '67, there's the war.
It was a Six-Day War.
And is that when Israel gets?
That's when Israel took control of that area.
So then, I don't know.
And then there was the 73 War, which happened 30 years ago last week.
Which
was the Yom Kippur War, where Israel was attacked on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of its year,
By Syria.
By Syria.
By all of the Arab countries jumped it, not just Syria. They all jumped it.
Okay, so I guess
Egypt and Syria.
Egypt and Syria and Jordan came in too.
But,
Egypt and Syria and Jordan came in too.
not Palestine.
well, I guess
Well,
then my
because there was no Palestine.
So.
There was no Palestine. Palestine was part of Jordan.
Then I guess what my question was, maybe you guys are kind of representing Palestinians who do not want Israel there, and maybe in my mind you guys can symbolize, Israel, maybe Israelis who are actually arguing with the government saying, hey, we don't want this wall, but want to feel safe and live without fear. So how does that look in both? I mean, do either of you guys have a vision, or
I actually kind of like the idea of a wall, but I think it ought to go on the 67 border, the green line, because these people are so hurt and so afraid of each other that I think a wall, and the UN put that wall down, right down that 67 border and say, enough already, separate. And then, and then after things kind of cool down a little bit, maybe take that wall down. But I think a third party needs to set in. It needs to come in and say, you need help. You need help. The UN made those borders. The UN needs to fix those borders. That's
so
my
those
opinion.
borders are in 1967.
And 48.
There's 67 and they're quasi 48 when the armistice was drawn up. The wall, I mean, walls are walls, it's like I have a fence in my backyard and, I can jump the chain link portion, but I can't jump the 7-foot portion because I can't jump. They're no different than the Maginot Line, they're no different than the Great Wall of China. You can just go right around a wall. It is a stupid waste of resources.
Well, I don't think you should say
Okay.
stupid, it was someone's idea.
No, it was a stupid, ill-conceived
Well, I know, but
idea.
her analogy, at least no matter how anyone views it, it's an idea, and I think ideas need to come out, you need to have ideas.
Not when you sink that
you
much
have
money
a hot
into
button.
it.
You have a hot button, but I have a hot button when I feel like there's this little, I don't know, I just think you should be able to discuss things without offending people. And I really take your point saying that things need to be looked at from all the way around in order to do that.
All right, well, the wall was misguided. And you feel more comfortable that way? It was a misguided idea.
One of the other members of our group, I think, described it really well, saying that walls were a mechanism of defense in the Middle Ages. They don't do anything today. They are 500 years outdated.
Right.
And it's not going to do anything here either.
I think the communications between the two groups is what's key, and we did meet with a lot of different organizations that are trying to fuse the two cultures, because what happens in these situations is a lot of racism kind of stems out from it, being from the ignorance of not being able to see the other side because of things like walls and barriers that are being put between these two people. But we met with a woman named Tamar, and she is working on, this is an example of a magazine that is working with children, because I do feel like the children that we see there, they're the ones being affected greatly by the situation that's there right now, because they're growing up and all they know is this violence, and they go home and they watch the news and they hear their parents comments and things, and all these things influence them and how they feel and how they act when they get older. And so in this magazine, I have, like, if you guys want to look at it, I have a translation of it. But what it does is take it's free to Palestinian children and Israelis buy the magazine. It's called
Windows.
It's not called Mideast. It's called
Oh, that's what the organization.
Courage to Listen.
Organization.
Courage to Listen is the title of the magazine, and Windows is a channel for communication, so it's like this organization which is putting out this catalog.
Why must we be so brutal? Why must we terrify the world and bloody her knees? Why can't we bury our arguments instead of so many people let them free? All of us are innocent, none of us are innocent. We all must take responsibility. There's fortune enough among us, a higher power, fair and just. Why can't we find a way to live peacefully? We're on our knees, begging please. Why can't we hold each other's hands, live quietly? What's to be gained from such violence? Can the world survive this killing creed? All of us are innocent, none of us are innocent. We all must take responsibility. There's intelligence enough among us, a higher power, fair and just. Why can't we find a way to live peacefully? Why can't we save our oceans for children's holidays? Keep our mountains and rivers safe. How can we live with our sons with such atrocity? Perhaps we'll see God light one day. All of us are innocent, none of us are innocent. We all must take responsibility. There's holy land enough among us, a higher power, fair and just. Why can't we learn to live peacefully? Why must we be so brutal? Why must
passed along, each one of them is very, very careful to get a bit of every garnish, every item on the plate. So there is nothing on any of these plates that hasn't been checked, tasted, and scored by our judges. They are taken